Terrific. Well, welcome everybody to a kind of a new and digitally inspired Schwartz round with Joe and Naman from Radchat. This isn't how we usually do Schwartz rounds. We usually have our panel, we usually have our audience, but today in Hammersmith, and because Hammersmith, our audience is kind of safely warm and snug behind the desks. So we thought we'd do something different and beam it out, and hopefully we can make this happen. For people who have been to a Schwartz round, you might recognize the idea that we have here a conversation about ourselves as healthcare professionals and what is our experience of working in healthcare. Our colleagues here have been doing something amazing, and they'll tell you about it, and they've heard lots of very inspiring stories. And today I'll be asking them to kind of share some of these inspiring stories and the difference made to them. In a Schwartz round, the importance is to be as open and honest and personal about sort of telling oneself stories so that other people can share and reflect and connect and facilitate that sense of connecting to the values that we all aspire to, sort of connecting as people on a human level, and sort of bringing together a sense of belonging, that we're kind of together. We'll be together digitally, which is a new and exciting venture. I call this sort of Schwartz roundish because the kind of group discussion element will be missing today, so it's going to be just us chatting. We've got a couple of colleagues here. Others might just walk in, which would be fantastic. So we won't have the element of the kind of group discussion, but we'll certainly have the pleasure of the people here with us. Of course, I will do only the briefest introductions to allow you to do the proper, good, full dose ones. I'll try and use the, therapeutic radiography language. So full dose today. So you have Naman and Joe. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
So I'm an advanced practice therapeutic radiographer working at Charing Cross, and I also work 2 days a week as a National Clinical AHP Advisor for Macmillan Cancer Support. And then if you've seen our logo, one half of my face is on Radchat logo.
And the other half is?
Joe McNamara. So I'm a therapeutic radiographer. I work as a senior lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University and was also a former National Clinical Fellow with Macmillan. And I also do various guises, but the main hobby is Radchat.
So tell us about Radchat. The story.
So Naman used to run a podcast with a colleague, and I went on as a guest, and it kind of petered out, didn't it? Didn't really go anywhere. And Naman approached me to say, thinking of starting a podcast. Are you interested? Absolutely. I like the sound of my own voice, which was probably the first mistake, because as a podcast host, you actually shouldn't talk much.
Yeah.
So it was a big learning curve, but it was initially something that we did largely to use the patient voice to inform practice. That was kind of the premise behind it. And it has just gone slightly crazy. And now we probably spend half our time, weekends, evenings, doing Radchat.
I should say I only approached Joe because of our dress book. It's quite well known in the radiotherapy world. We've actually, this is probably the 9th time we've ever met face to face. We work for a charity called Radiotherapy UK in the background, and we've done lots of things through COVID virtually. And then I realised that Joe knows everyone. So if I want something to grow within a year, I approached Joe, and then we ran it.
Within a year?
We've only been doing this for a year and 4 months.
And tell us about where you got to.
So when we started, for the first few months, we were only in the UK, and I think yesterday I checked we're in 95 countries in the world being listened to. So we've got 4 series, so EDI, leadership, education, workforce development, and then the best one, which I really like, my favourite, is the patient voice, so living with and beyond cancer. We've done pretty well. Today we get some awards after this.
Yes.
Regional and Team of the Year from the Society of Radiographers. And then we also won the European Federation of Radiological Societies Patient-Centered Care Award for the podcast. So that's for the whole of Europe.
And he always leaves this out, but Numan has also won Radiographer of the Year as well.
Yeah.
So across diagnostic and therapeutic.
So today is the gala, yes?
Yeah.
It is absolutely terrific to hear, absolutely huge achievement. And, kind of clearly, you worked on, existing kind of connections and capabilities, but then you kind of brought people together and heard their stories, and those stories kind of had impact and snowballed. So when we're preparing and talking about this, I was asking you to think about some of the stories you've heard along the way that have an impact on you, right? As you say, you're not supposed to talk a lot. You're supposed to facilitate other people's stories. So now I'm kind of flipping the script a bit here and saying, and what about you? What did you hear? What were the moments that perhaps inspired you that you really will remember? Amongst the, how many episodes are we in now?
We've done over 100.
Over 100 episodes. So yeah, where would you start?
So I should say, obviously, because you're here, number 70 was probably the best one.
That's
because that's a lot that you came before. But no, I think when we spoke, we talked about Larson's Pride, which is a quite small, newish charity. So Larson was a young boy who had a brain tumour, quite a rare one, and his mum and his dad, they set up Larson's Pride in his memory. And actually, that one is probably the first time I ever cried on screen. So I was looking at Jo, obviously Holly was describing her son Larson and the experience that they had. Jo started crying, I was like, don't do it, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And then, yeah, it was very emotional because Larson died, and actually the best experience of the whole pathway was radiotherapy, which normally for paediatrics, they usually have general anaesthetic. It's quite traumatizing, if you want, because you're seeing your child go in completely under, and then they're having radiotherapy for upwards, sometimes 45 minutes, and then, every single day. But
every single day?
Every single day, apart from the weekends, obviously. But Holly was so, she just spoke about our profession, so therapeutic radiography, in such an amazing way that actually that's what we do. We're the only profession that does an oncology degree to get into an oncology job. And actually working with paediatrics is very emotionally charged, but that was the one that always sticks out to me, I think.
And what do you remember most after that? What did it leave with you?
I think for the rest of the day, I was just like, oh God, we do a really hard job. I think the appreciation of how personalised we can make things. So chemotherapy, you have a very specific pathway process, but radiotherapy, Holly made sure that Larson didn't have to have general anaesthetic, and that's quite rare for a young person to stay still for that long. But it's the personalised care element, which Jo does a lot of and talks about. Just taking it through into practice, that actually every patient is their own person. There's so much going on for them. I really enjoyed that episode. It still makes me a bit emotional.
It really, it does. It certainly comes across. And, what a wonderful encounter. Thank you. And do you remember that episode, or as well?
Absolutely.
What was your perspective on that?
So I think we advocate for personalised care within any healthcare profession, in any arena within the NHS. But actually being able to deliver it can sometimes be really challenging, and there are lots of barriers. Whereas I think Holly identified within her episode how us being able to personalise care for Larson with having awake radiotherapy meant that Larson could attend school. He was a very bright little boy. He was really passionate about wanting to go to school, and how she described it is that it was the best few months of his life. By being able to come for radiotherapy, we personalised it with the music. He had the imagery they used, the sticker charts. He loved big cats. So they kind of personalised everything to Larson, and then he would skip off to school. And for Holly, she said it was an amazing time of his life. And as a family, they came together and felt really connected. And actually, she said, considering he had a cancer diagnosis, and because of the kind of diagnosis he had, it could have been very emotionally charged. For her, it was a pleasurable experience, which you would never anticipate from a parent to say, I enjoyed my child going for treatment. It's not something you would necessarily say, but that was her experience because it was so personalised.
And I guess I'm hearing from you that in that position, it was kind of the the person sort of hearing that story, but in a podcast, you know, there is a sense of pride in that, you know, and the thing is that in that position you can hear those stories because they come and they come to you, and hearing stories of pride must be a nice feeling. I think we're a bit short of that often, aren't we? Like what's worked well, you're in a position where those stories come to you, you know, and what tell me a bit more about that, kind of what did that story leave you with as a person?
So I think it's always the case that I'm passionate about being a therapeutic radiographer. I absolutely love my job. I love what I do. You know, a lot of my friends would say if you cut me in half, I'd be like a stick of rock with therapeutic radiographer within it. But I think actually having someone who's had a positive experience like that does make you professionally proud. And I suppose sharing it, one of the big things that we get across with the podcast is that we are therapeutic radiographers and we work within oncology, and we're quite an unseen profession. But by doing the podcast, we've also found lots of other healthcare professionals who are in very similar guises who don't get that kind of recognition. And actually, sometimes I think patients refer quite a lot to nurses, doctors, without necessarily knowing the wider team. And I think the podcast and the social media wraparound that we do has highlighted to patients that they may be the people that they would go to for specific questions or queries.
So it's sort of, for you, it sort of kind of really goes into that mission, right? You're kind of sitting there kind of going, this is really what I want. And what other stories do you remember that maybe are sort of similar feeling or maybe bring up different feelings?
I suppose for me, the EDI element, so we've done lots of podcast episodes. Ashwin was, can you remember the number? I can't remember the number of the episode, but he talked about coming from India. He was a physiotherapist, quite a high senior level, came into the UK, and basically was told that his qualification wasn't recognised. He really struggled to register with HCPC and had to start at the band 5. And he was talking about his family dynamics. And he's openly gay, married, really happy, loving relationship, and yet his family knew nothing about that. And it was an episode for me that just made me appreciate cultural differences, religious differences, and the impact it can have on someone, as well as obviously going into the NHS with almost that inherent stigma that you already have as a consequence of not being able to talk to your family and be your authentic self, but then also not being able to be authentic at work. And I think that, like, for me, I did get choked up because I was just like, I can't imagine what that must be like. And then some of the reflections from that episode was, how can I, like, is that the same for our patients? If we as healthcare professionals can't be our authentic selves, there's no way a patient is going to be able to do that either. And actually, are we creating an environment where people aren't saying what their sexual preference is or their pronouns? You know, are they hiding behind a societal view of what they should ask and how they should behave? And it was definitely one of those episodes for me that highlighted health inequalities.
And I guess it's because you're kind of also, when you talk to people, you hear their sort of personal story, right? Not just the patient. So you're not necessarily starting with the patient or the clinical story. You're also starting with a kind of personal story, and then you get to hear those things that are formative, and therefore you're able to sort of connect with those bigger things about, that sort of sense of, there might be people around here that are hiding like this one, and that kind of hits home. That's really interesting, yes. And that stays with you. And Naman, that episode, do you remember anything else about it? Do you have similar, different reactions to that?
I knew where he was from in India, so we'd spoken before.
Okay.
So it was interesting, because obviously for me, I was like, this is a normal dynamic in an Indian family.
Okay.
Either due to homosexuality or just views. So my family don't care that I'm marrying my fiancée Katie, who's from Essex and very white. but other people who I've met, even patients, will question it. So I can understand the dynamic from his. It was interesting putting it in that perspective. And obviously for him coming here being so senior, where he probably would have been maybe an ACP level in India, it was just interesting that he had to start from the bottom. But that's the, I don't know, I don't want to be too bold and say structural racism element of the NHS, but that not recognising the same degree from a foreign country when they're coming here for a better life or to progress their skills. I think it's improving in some areas, but the international worker force, all that, it was quite eye-opening to understand how hard it really is on the ground.
That also is interesting, as in you have perspective on stories from around the world, right? Which is a bit hard to get usually, right? We don't, it's not easily kind of accessible. And I think you remember some other stories as well, you said, that are memorable, or at least audience reactions.
Yeah, I think audience reactions. So we've had, for example, Ina Butt, who came on. So she was a breast cancer patient, and she does lots of advocacy work in the Southeast Asian community. So mainly around stigma. So in India, especially including when COVID came out, it was a stigma that if you have cancer, it's a death sentence. No one really talks to you anymore. Once you're outcast, and it's similar to the COVID pandemic. If you got COVID, people stopped talking to you, that sort of thing. But from her, some of the statistics she said to us were pretty shocking. I think there's a survey that they did of Southeast Asian women, I'm going to say in England or in London, they found that 2,000 of them thought that breast cancer only affected white women because the adverts only showed white women and things like that. So that was quite eye-opening because working in Northwest London, you have quite a big Asian community here, and thinking that most of them do present quite late as well, aren't sure what's going on. That was quite eye-opening to see, well, actually the advocacy work is really important because it's about visibility. So now, when I'm working with Macmillan, or I think any kind of element that we do, we're always pushing the fact that, you know, it doesn't just have to be the narrative of always just white patients as a normality. So I do a lot of skincare research, and that episode really stemmed into it, where medical education, if you look in textbooks, is primarily always lighter skin tones for skin problems. So yeah, that's, I don't know, at the beginning, I think I was texting Joe saying this makes me really angry because it shouldn't be like that. We're there in the NHS to help everyone, but actually people like me or people with darker skin are not being helped, or they're being missed, or whether it's prejudice or not, whatever it is, it still should be happening. I think from that, we've really got that across in every episode. So health inequalities is quite a big aspect of it, of the podcast, and any element of it.
And it's like you were saying, Alex, around having someone tell their story is much more impactful than me talking to a group of students or healthcare professionals about health inequalities. Everyone goes, yeah, we're doing something about it, we're trying to address it, things are changing. But I think hearing someone's experience really does kind of pull on the heartstrings to go, oh my God, I never realised the impact of X, Y, and Z on someone. And I think it makes it a realisation, a reality of what is actually happening and the consequences of that. And I think it's far more impactful that way than maybe some new protocol coming through going, you need to do X, Y, and Z.
And people sort of, you know, respond to stories in a way that you then encounter kind of offline. Right, so while you're doing the podcast, there's the kind of, you know, how you react to the person there, also the discussions you have with them before they might influence you. But another thing that I've heard from you that influences you is the kind of the stream of reactions, right? And presumably that kind of never stops because obviously, you don't stop tweeting and stuff like that. It's keep coming at you.
Yeah.
Right, so it's kind of probably like, you know, quite a sort of, you know, how much inspiration can one take? You know, what's that like? The kind of the constant dialogue.
It's overwhelming. Our partners, my husband, Katie, they are. Yeah, I think.
Trying to put it politely.
Yeah, you basically will be enthused to make change. I feel a huge responsibility, and I think you do as well, about kind of making sure that we're not just creating a podcast that's easy listening. Lots of celebrities now have podcast episodes, so it's something to chuckle to whilst you're commuting or something like that. We want the podcast to essentially elicit change and ensure that practice is improved, patient experience is improved. So it's making sure that you're not just listening to someone's experiencing and realising that actually something needs to improve or change and just letting it go. It's following it through with that, and that's.
But with what you're giving yourself there, right? You're kind of reading these comments and responding to people, and
yeah, I think there's two elements to it. One is sort of the social media side where patients reach out to us and say, you posted this image of a linear accelerator. I've never seen one before. I'm going for radiotherapy next week. Thank you. That's put my mind at ease. I know what to expect. The fear of the unknown in any medical area is like, it's always hard. If anyone's ever been for a procedure, you know, oh, I don't know what to expect. I can't find where it is. You know, all of those things. But we've, mainly Joe, to be fair, on that side, has got nice few images from radiotherapy departments just showing this is what happens when the lights get turned down. So we always work in the dark, and then explaining why that happens. It might seem simple when you would expect most people to say it, but I think as healthcare professionals, I'm probably guilty of it as well, as you forget that you're in your norm. So you just say, oh yeah, this is why we do it. You're not explaining to every single patient what you do all the time. You get complacent. But I think that from the social media side, the patients reaching out is just, I completely agree with Joe, the responsibility for patients saying, I never had this, I wish I had this 5 years ago.
But then you're sitting there trying to kind of go, well, I better not miss this one.
Yeah, I think we're good at protecting ourselves. It is hard, and we try and refer to local departments more, because obviously the legal side, we can't just offer personalised advice. But I think the extra element on the other hand is the CPD element. So the podcast is accredited by the Society of Radiographers, CPD now. So you can listen to the episode. We post reflective questions, so you listen to it. If you reflect on the questions, you get CPD points for it. 'Cause, I mean, how hard is it at the moment to get time to go? I was going to say that's why there's not that many people here. They're just going to get time to leave the department to come, or find Town Smith, whatever. But,
and if we didn't mention episode 7, it's particularly good. Just a main point. And yeah, but there is something for you there. Like you kind of joked about it, but actually there is something about this responsibility that kind of rests right with you and being visible and having that kind of, well, a bit Spider-Man power responsibility, sort of ratio. And, you feel that sense of pride and then that is also a kind of a thing that you're holding.
I think it's passion though, so we don't see it as a job. Like it feels like a job sometimes if I'm up there till midnight and doing editing an episode, but actually, it's the passion behind it that we know that this is a great platform to bring about change. I mean, impact is incredible. So obviously, we've been listened to in lots of countries, but any of the sex and intimacy episodes that we've done, I had a friend who works in New Zealand who texted me and said, we've never considered this for our patients in radiotherapy. We're now looking into it. They've set service up. That's just from listening to 2 of our episodes, and that's not going to help patients in New Zealand in that department forever. You can't really take that. That is a bit of pride, I think, for us. I love that example. Even if you have one patient with one episode, we've done 100 episodes, if help 100 patients, and then 95 countries. That's the snowball effect. Even if it's one, it's still going to keep going. Even if it changes the perspective of one person, great.
I mean, that sense of kind of impact, right, is. There's a sense of kind of pride and getting that sense of kind of putting things right and making an impact. It's really, it really sort of feeds the warm bits of the heart. And for you, Joe, what was the bit of impact that you most remember?
I think for me, being an educator, so I educate across all health and social care courses. We educate 32% of the therapeutic radiography workforce. So I am a better lecturer as a consequence of Brad Chat, absolutely, categorically. There are things that I never used to give any kind of emphasis behind. I certainly did not include health inequalities in the education I was providing. I think that impact is the biggest thing that's come out of Brad Chat for me, is educating the future workforce using the continual professional development that I get to do every single week through Brad Chat, but also the networking, the linking, the expertise that is out there. It's drawing on that and pulling it into the education framework that we've got to ensure that the future workforce are considering all these elements. And again, using the patient voice is so powerful. My students, I'm sure, will sit there and eye roll and go, oh, she's on it again. She's talking about personalised care or X, Y, and Z. But I can promise you that if I bring a patient into the classroom or I put on the audio, a rad chat episode, they sit up and take notice and go, oh gosh, I never really appreciated that, or actually I don't see that in practice. That's something that I can change. And if anything, it's about empowering them to not go with currently what's in practice, but thinking about what needs to change. And you're creating leaders and change activists for the future. And that's quite exciting to be able to kind of do that. But CPD element is amazing. When you read the comments and the feedback, one of the standard questions when we get people to do the CPD is how has rad chat changed practice? And there was a perfect example, wasn't there, from a district nurse?
Yeah, around skincare. So a health visitor who evaluates babies every day, but the skincare research that I did looking at how erythema presents on different skin tones, it always says redness, but on really dark skin you don't get redness, which I've known since I was younger, but it's not anywhere in any of the tools or assessments in it at all. But just that episode we did about skincare, talking about it, the health visitor did the CPD and said, yeah, actually in the community that I work with, there's a lot of dark skinned, dark pigmented babies, and I've never considered to look for red. I've always been looking for redness. They said, well, actually, potentially I've missed stuff, but now I know what to look out for in the future. And I think locally they'd start to change some of their guidelines and stuff. That's that's not even in oncology technically. So that's the kind of the reach of it. And we always thought it'd be just about radiotherapy. But the more and more we talk, I mean, with a patient, radiotherapy might just be a small snapshot of their pathway. They'll have had chemotherapy, surgery, immunotherapy. There's a brain patient that I've seen, they're on 8 different trials. I mean, there's so many different elements to a patient's pathway. That impacts on what the podcast can do from every episode. Actually, the patients love the technical ones.
Yeah.
The ones where we talk about how DNA breaks down and things like that. They love them.
Yeah. Presumably because if you already search for a podcast about your radiotherapy, you're already a little bit into how do things work. And, so it's a kind of an interesting bit. And as you sort of saying, I'm just thinking, it's sort of creating a new way of learning in some ways, right? As you say, what now kind of people appreciate stories and appreciate kind of personal impact and kind of reflection just as much as direct material and kind of sort of knowledge. And there's lots of things where that is better, like, equality, like personalization, right? You can't teach that stuff on a board in a way that you can do that. So that's really interesting.
There's the other side as well of how people view cancer patients. There's 2 episodes that always stand out. So Leo Cancer Care, which I'll let you because you've actually been there, and then Captain Ken Errington, the captain of a rare kind of lung tumour in the army. So he nearly died from something else, was deployment, and he's in the infantry. But his perspective, that's the only episode where I've been really drawing on my interpersonal skills to get some information out. Typical. So how did you find your treatment? Yeah, it's fine, I just got on with it. Okay. Most patients don't say that. Most patients will go into an array of different avenues or things you talk about. But his perspective, I think we both sat to each other afterwards saying, yeah, that's actually going to be really valuable for people just to think, well, I've had this. Like, yes, I have to get through it, but it's just I don't know, some people take things very emotionally, especially in cancer, and that's normal because you're going through a tough time. But he just said, maybe it's my training, but the resilience, just get on with it. If something else happens, I'll do that. Like, his whole career has changed because he'll never be deployed again. He basically has to be medically retired and leave, become a civilian soon because of his cancer, but just,
I asked him at the end, after the podcast had finished, I did say, your outlook is very different to any patient that we've had on the podcast before. He was just, is it? Why? And I was like, because the way that you discussed having cancer, it was almost like you were desensitized to it. I was like, and I was like, is that how you feel, or is that kind of the front that you put on because you're on a podcast or because of the fact you're in the army? And he said, I think it's the training.
Right.
I can deal with anything. My day-to-day life in deployment was, could I potentially die? Yeah. So actually having cancer and a terminal diagnosis for me isn't any different to being on deployment. So it's really interesting to kind of gauge a different perspective on coping mechanisms and resilience, and I suppose that's where your work comes in.
And you know, and what's interesting about that is as well, because you will hear all sorts of different ways. There is something about kind of selecting the stories as well, potentially, right? Because as you're saying, we have a sort of a template of what you're supposed to sort of be like, what you're supposed to experience. And that's fine, because obviously that's the reality for some people. But then there are really edge people like that who probably find their bit of, well, it was okay, really quite sort of difficult. A lot of the discussions I have is when people don't have the normal reaction, the people around them are really disturbed. They're thinking something bad's going on because you're not, well, you're too emotional or not enough emotional, or, and it's kind of embracing, I suppose, or showcasing the full range of things is quite an interesting, bit of power there, and obviously insightful, because, you wouldn't necessarily see that easily, right? So you're showing that to people and seeing that yourselves. And I love the bit that you then have that discussion afterwards, because, in the thing, you're like, I can't say that.
We could often do a podcast afterwards.
Yeah, we always say we wish we kept rolling.
Yeah, and you told me now as well that you've become braver, or was it you, Joe? Who told me that you've become braver
We both have.
in sort of going places with people as a result of actually having been podcasters? Can you remember any?
At the start, we would have proper show notes for each other, like different stats, things we want to bring up, and then eventually we just said, we don't need to do that. We know the stuff, but it's about the person in front of you. And obviously, every time you hear a patient story, it's always so different, regardless of them having the same tumour type or whatever, or treatment. But everyone in different areas of the UK or abroad has had a different experience of cancer, and that's obviously why it's so unique, and we shouldn't be treating everyone the same every time. But I think with patients now, I'm a lot braver to just get stuff out of them or send them different links, where I think the sex and intimacy side, I'm from a very conservative Indian background. You don't really talk about sex in the house. Me and Joey, who talks about sex all the time on episodes. Sorry, you just...
Yeah, sorry.
But it's just interesting. So even hearing young people, and then if you're put into a forced menopause because of your treatment in your 30s or 20s, you don't just, I mean, you might do, but it's not... doesn't mean you're just going to stop having intimacy with someone. So that side has really changed my work, just trying to almost tackle people's perceptions of how things should be, or the LGBTQ plus community, just everything. I'm so much braver because of the podcast, because I know, well, actually I've just said it to 95 different countries, my feelings online. I can do it to the patient one-to-one. And then linking with different areas, or even if we don't have the right support within our trust, I'm happy to link outside to charities and stuff. And now that we have some incredible contacts from across the country, you get the support you need for your patient there and then, or they can help find signposting, whatever it is. It's that network. I love it. It's amazing. It makes life so much easier with patients.
We've connected with about 30 charities through doing the podcast. So whether that's having them on or helping them in a charity capacity. So Ticking Off Breast Cancer, who works really closely with Future Dreams, is a breast cancer charity. And they had some information about radiotherapy, but actually it was quite outdated and inaccurate, didn't really give the patient lots of information. And so we approached them to say, would you be interested in working together? And as a consequence, they now have a full how to prepare for radiotherapy, what radiotherapy is. They link to the podcast and advertise it to their patients. So again, we know that if patients are struggling emotionally or physically, that necessarily doesn't need medical attention, we can refer patients to that peer support network that they have. And likewise, they can kind of refer to the podcast or the social media that we have to help patients prepare for radiotherapy. So having that extended network of people and expertise and advice benefits the patients.
And creates a platform for connections to happen, and people come to you because you're the face of things, and then you can connect other things. And of course, as we said, that is a calling and a responsibility and a job, and it's very fulfilling, and responds to that sense of passion. But it is also at the same time, things come to you and you're like, Have you ever said no?
Well, I think we've never said no to an opportunity.
Okay.
So an opportunity to get involved in things, we're the yes people. Like that comes up in my PDP all the time, going, you need to learn to say no.
Does it?
I'm not a no. But the thing is, I think if I was a no person, I wouldn't know as much as I know, because I use those opportunities to learn and develop. And I'm glad I'm a yes person. I say it time and time again to my line manager. I don't want to be
This
a no
objective
person.
will not be met.
Yeah, but we definitely say no to patients in terms of, we will get questions being asked of us on social media.
Can you comment on this?
Yes, and we always act within our scope of practice and say you need to speak to your oncology team. I think the way we get round it is to support those patients in asking the right questions.
Yeah.
So why don't you approach your therapeutic radiographers? Some of them may be like, I've got this issue around radiotherapy, or I feel that actually my dignity isn't being respected when I'm having radiotherapy because they don't cover me up when I'm on the radiotherapy couch. So it's about us kind of supporting the patient to go, please, just let the therapeutic radiographers know that that's how you're feeling, because they absolutely will make that change. It's just because sometimes we can become blasé with, we see a lot of breast cancer patients, and therefore we become desensitized to seeing patients with their tops off. But for them, it's impacting on their experience. So it's, again, supporting that patient advocacy in kind of questioning, do you mind if you cover me up? And they wouldn't have the confidence to do that without maybe having a discussion with us.
So the other thing you're noticing there is, I guess I'm hearing that you're noticing an opportunity to sort of direct people in how they relate to the healthcare system, right? So it's kind of models that as well, right? A sense of, whatever, that's kind of autonomy or self-efficacy. There's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So you've got an award today to get, so we better get you out of here. But before I finish, last question. What is the question that you really would like to answer? If I was to ask you that question, what would that question be? If you'd really like to answer a question about your own personal experience of Radchat, right? About your own personal sort of moments that matter, what inspired you, perhaps there's a sort of something that you'd be coming here thinking, I hope Alex kind of gets to that bit, because that's my proudest, most inspiring bit. Well, what would you like me to ask you? Oh, you get what we're getting on screen, capacity alert for Charing Cross. Wow. But it's not a surprise anymore. It's not. I think we should sort of do something where sort of the colours vary. So you never really know. Like, so you actually have to sort of see something and notice it because it's the same thing. I
don't know about that question, Alex. That's really hard. Largely because I think it's the impact stuff for us. I think when we started, I never thought it would have developed the way it's developed. We do get asked quite a lot now, going, we're physios, should we do a podcast? And so I suppose advice for other people considering how entrepreneurial you can get outside of what your day job is. And my advice would be absolutely go for it. We were terrified when we started. And especially as more people listen to it, you're kind of at a parapet and you're kind of giving your opinions and things, and that is putting yourself out there. So you have to be brave, and sometimes that takes reassurance and guidance. And radiotherapy is amazing because we have lots of critical friends that we will kind of bounce things off of, and we have an amazing student therapeutic radiography team that support listening to things. And actually that's really powerful because they get to listen and make sure that what they're learning about is accurate, as well as obviously the technical side of things. But I would say absolutely go for it, but you have to recognise that just doing a podcast in itself is not going to make it a success. You have to know how to disseminate it. You have to do research. So we work with PPI groups and do research around utilising the podcast.
That is very good.
And I think doing that means that dissemination is greater. working with your professional body, and also seeing what else is out there. You have to kind of find your little kind of niche to allow people to look into it.
And then also find yourself a friend who has a bigger dress book.
Yeah.
I was thinking exactly that. So it's going a full circle back to the address.
Right. Joe always mentions it, and I just have to be honest, it helps. So
yeah, so it needs that kind of the personality, the mission. That it needs some flexibility in your role, your time. It needs understanding partners. So it might be a good time for you guys to kind of say thank you to the partners.
Don't get a glass of champagne later.
Well, so tell me about what you're doing later.
So yeah, we're going to the Barbican to get regional and team of the year awards, and then I get my personal ones, and then in the evening just a drink.
Appreciation drinks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been absolutely sort of wonderful and just sort of free flowing. Obviously, we've kept going without the audience because we're sort of having so much fun here. What's it like kind of doing this to very seasoned kind of media professionals today? Schwartz.
Perfect host.
Yeah. It's nice for mine or Joe's internet not to cut out, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, you don't know.
We don't know if it's recorded yet.
We don't know what kind of the Wi-Fi has done to the recording yet, so we can see.
It's been great. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
I really, really appreciate your kind of time and enthusiasm. I think these are some, really lovely stories that also give us, something of you in this. You put a lot of yourselves into this, into having made this happen, into running it, into kind of all the other things that make it, successful. You get a lot out of it from what I'm hearing. That kind of, it's very nourishing. It's, personal. It's not, it's not a job. It's kind of personal. And I think that's one of the core ideas we were starting with here is that, we are pretty ground down at the moment, right? And, can we share some stories where people who still somehow, somewhere, found the energy and found the kind of the drive to, make new things happen. So, thank you very much for sharing these stories. I hope we will use this kind of together to get those stories out there, get that kind of inspiration and respect also to you. So thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Terrific. How long did we go for?